Hey there guys, so I've been testing the Beelink SER5 Max for the past couple of days now, and I've really been enjoying testing out this system. It's the first Ryzen 7 mini PC that I've been able to get my hands on, and I've been very impressed with the results so far. Now I've taken a look at a couple of games running on here. I got about 15 of them. We're going to run through it and see what the performance is like before we get into the videos where we will be comparing this specific system with the other versions of the SRE5 and as well as the SRE6. So stay tuned for those, but check out the performance in all these different titles. So starting things off, we're taking a look at Valorant running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. That's usually how I end up running the game. We do have the experimental sharpening and the enhanced clarity features turned on though. But it really seems like this game in particular loves the increased clock speeds of the CPU here thanks to that higher TDP. And of course the frame times look absolutely fantastic. It's pretty much the perfect game to pair with a system like this because this does mean that we could actually utilize a high refresh rate monitor and get full advantage out of it. And this does also carry over into CSGO, though to a slightly lower extent. We do see a little bit worse in terms of 1% lows, and even the averages are a little bit lower. But for the most part, the experience of actually playing it feels pretty much identical in the sense that both of them feel absolutely smooth and perfect to play on here. And like I said, both of these games are really the most ideal to pair with a system like this because you're able to actually fully take advantage of a high refresh rate display. Of course, a game that I always love taking a look at it is Alien Isolation because it is one of my favorite games from one of my favorite franchises, and it just plays really well on really just any system out there. In this system with this APU, we are able to actually play the game at the ultra graphics settings and still get a pretty much 60 FPS average. That does mean that if we do want to play around with some of the graphics settings, we could push this to an above 60 FPS average without really sacrificing much at all in terms of the visual quality. Another game that actually ran really well on here was Forza Horizon 5. It was running at the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we weren't using any kind of upscaling or anything like that. At just the native 1080p resolution, we were practically at a 60 FPS average, and our 1% lows are not that far off from our averages, which means we would actually get a really rock-solid experience here. And you'll see that throughout the benchmark here, the frame time charts look pretty remarkable, as flat as you would want them to be, and this is realistically the most ideal situation. And we didn't have to rely on FSR or CAS upscaling to actually get a decent FPS in this game. Now, I also took a look at Total War Warhammer 3. It does have actually some pretty extensive built-in benchmarks. Here you can see the last one, which is the most intense, but the performance numbers really are not that far off from what we saw in all of the different benchmarks for this game. So in general, it is just not going to be a good experience at the full 1080p resolution. As you can see, we are really pushing the system hard to just barely get us double-digit FPS numbers. And whether it was in the combat or whether it was in the campaign overworld, the FPS really never even made it into the 20s, preferring to just stick around in the teens. All around, just not a great experience here. And of course, we also have World War Z Aftermath running here with FSR set at the quality preset and everything else set to low. We do actually get some pretty nice performance in terms of our FPS average and 1% lows. Every time at the beginning of the benchmark, the 1% lows would look pretty brutal with some stutters here and there, but as the benchmark ended, things would recover, and our 1% lows would end up catching up to our FPS average, to the point where if you were actually playing the game, and I did play a few rounds on here just to make sure that there were no inconsistencies, it is a very rock solid experience, and most of the time those 1% lows will end up sticking very close to those averages. It will just be rare occasions where you will find a stutter here and there. Now, for you absolute degenerates that love to play Civilization, here we have the Civ 6 turn time test running, and we ended up getting a score of 9.6 seconds, which is pretty brutal. If we were playing a very long campaign here, that would actually end up eating up a lot of our time just waiting in between turns. So certainly not the most ideal, and already this is a CPU that is clocking up pretty high due to some aggressive TDP settings. So it seems like we'd really need to move over to Alder Lake or Raptor Lake or Zen 4 to start to push some better numbers here. Now, I also took a look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we weren't using any kind of upscaling or anything like that. And we pretty much ended up getting an FPS average of 35 with 1% lows of 30, which means that we weren't getting a high refresh rate gaming experience, but we were getting a pretty consistent 30 FPS gaming experience. So in general, it's actually pretty passable, and it did better than what I was expecting it to. So overall, I was impressed, but it just wasn't anything remarkable. Of course, I did also take a look at Rise of the Tomb Raider, and that pretty much ended up giving us better performance than the last game for the most part in terms of the FPS average, though the 1% lows were consistently ending up lower. Now, that was also in the built-in benchmark, but even while playing the actual game itself, the 1% lows were occasionally stuttering here and there, though it could just be depending on the specific area that you are in. But of course, the absolute best performer here was the original Tomb Raider remake, because that ran at the highest in-game graphics settings and it ended up giving us the best FPS result. Of course, at this point, it is quite a few years old. I think at this point it's become 10 years old, but the fact that you are actually able to go back and play this game at the high graphics settings is a welcome addition, especially since we will be also above 60 FPS. Of course, Metro Exodus fared far worse here, running at the lowest in-game graphics settings at the full 1080p resolution. Our FPS average was pretty much just in the tweens, and our 1% lows could not get past the single-digit range. So an absolutely brutal and abysmal showing here. But Borderlands 3 ended up faring far better, though still not ideal. It is at a far more playable range with an FPS average of 41, but 1% lows at 34. This is the thing that I have been noticing the most with this system, is that while we're not necessarily getting high FPS numbers, our 1% lows a lot of the time end up being very close to our averages, which means that we actually end up having a very consistent experience. It's the frame time charts that really end up looking the best with this specific system. And you see that repeat again here with Batman Arkham Knight, where another situation where we're not getting a high FPS average, where 1% lows are sticking very close to that FPS average, and the frame time charts end up looking really nice. And overall, it ends up giving you a very smooth and very consistent experience, even if it's not exactly going to blow you away with how high the FPS is. The fact that it's at least consistently above 30, even with the 1% lows, is a welcome addition, and is kind of the consolation prize there, where if we can't hit 60, at least give us the most consistent FPS possible. But again, where the system really seems to excel at is playing older titles that you might never have gotten around to playing, and you can play them at their highest graphics settings and a lot of the time still get a really nice level of performance. And again, what I mean, always pay attention to those frame time charts and the fact that those 1% lows are very close to those averages, because that really is what shows you how consistent of a gaming experience you're going to have. But lastly, here we have Horizon Zero Dawn running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR with the performance preset. And while we do get some nice results in those FPS averages and 1% lows, continuing this trend of really nice 1% lows to pair with otherwise passable FPS averages. The problem here is that we had to use FSR at the performance preset, and it really visually impacts this game dramatically, to the point where I would realistically not play the game like this, but really that comes down to personal preference for you.